What was Kurt Cobain like as a person, aside from the music, just as a friend?
What was Kurt Cobain like? He was like any friend of yours. He was just like somebody you would know, just like a regular person. And life goes on, and sometimes our friends get into bad scenes. And sometimes it doesn't work out well. And all the way through, he just seemed like a regular person trying to make the best out of what was going on there. And admittedly, yes, he had grand hopes of being a rock star, but he was just a real straightforward, just real from the heart dude. You know, Kurt Cobain was just as real as anyone, and not in like, oh, he's the most amazing guy and he loves everybody and he's got all this compassion. It was like, no, he just was a very, very cool person. But back then there were lots of those people, you know. Mm-hmm. So,
was there ever anything that you wish you could have told him?
This sounds like a funny answer, but you ever seen the Dylan movie, Don't Look Back?
I haven't, no, but I have heard of it.
Bob Dylan is so good at dealing with the media and just flipping the mirror around and just, if I had any retrospective things I wish I would have done, I wish I would have, Kurt, get that movie. Watch that movie over and over and over again, you know, because you're in the same thing, you know. Now every mic in the world is on you. Now everyone is expecting all these things of you. And it's not fair and it's all wrong. And, you know, I wish he could have had fun with it. And instead, I was, you know, it's a bad part of his life. You know?
The last few years, having gotten to speak with Jack Endino and Steve Albini and people who've actually worked with the band, it kind of corrects a lot of the false images that there are of the band out there. Like there's this kind of image that like sometimes Kurt is portrayed as a bit of a slacker, someone who didn't really care too much. But speaking with Steve and with Jack, they both said that he was very serious in the studio. So you had the same experience with him essentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did he approach recording vocals? Was there anything unique about his approach?
No, he just did it. I mean, he just stood in front of the microphone. It was a very good microphone. Neumann U67, same one we used for Beat Happening and anybody else that recorded there. And it, you know, he just sounded great. He just was a natural born singer. Just did that. A lot of people don't understand. There were so many good singers of that generation. Like within 5 years, I recorded Sean Smith, Reggie Watts, Chris Cornell, Calvin Johnson, Kurt Cobain, Mark Lanigan, and a lot of other great singers that no one knows about or, you know, other people know about. So the idea that you just, well, yeah, this is taking care of itself, you know, put Kurt in front of a Neumann mic, put it through this compressor, and we're in business, you know. It just sounded perfect.
So cool.
And it just happened organically and happened in 1 or 2 takes, you know. So
that's awesome. And was he easy to work with in the studio?
Yes.
That's cool. So
we had fun. It was a good time.
Okay, so they come to the studio, you start working with them. When did you first, like, was it right away you saw, okay, these guys are like he's a natural born singer, or like did it take a few takes for that to come through?
Oh, I knew that from the Bleach record. You know, I mean, it just sounded great. You know, he had what they call it, a vocal fry. He had a place where his voice went into overtones and I picked up all these harmonics, and it's just a classic thing that, you know, great rock singers have. And you could hear that all over the stuff. And then, believe me, I heard Bleach without ever. I don't think I ever put the record on in my house. I heard Bleach so many fucking times. You know, by the time I recorded Nirvana, because it got played on the radio or it got played in restaurants and all this. And, but yeah, there's a whole thing when a band's getting ready to track, and especially a guy like me, because I came to engineering later on than some people. So I work hard, maybe harder than some folks, because I'm really trying to, you know, not fuck up and do the best gig I can. But yeah, when you've got 3 people playing and, you know, 12, 20 mics all happening, you're running around checking this and that and checking levels, and you've got a tape machine, and there's all these things that can go wrong or overmodulate or, you know, what have you. And then you get, vocal. Oh, that's, you know, it's fun. You just sort of look in the middle of all of this shit. You go, oh, yeah, there you go. There's the vocal, and it just sounded perfect. It was just like him out in the room with the cymbals bleeding into everything, and he was just totally delivering, on the basic, not even as an overdub, just, while the band's laying down the basic, while he's doing allegedly a scratch vocal, he's just delivering it as if he was playing live,
That's amazing. So you mentioned about a minute ago that you also work with Chris Cornell. Was his approach to recording vocals different than Kurt's? Like, how would you compare the two of them as singers in the studio?
You have to understand, both these guys, I worked on records that were Econo records, and there wasn't any time for screwing around. And so both these guys just went in and did their part and didn't fuck around. And later, Cornell figured out all these ways to record and recorded himself a lot and chased everybody out of the room. I wasn't around for any of that. The early 90s to a certain extent, and then the 80s, definitely, they don't fit well onto the internet. And so it's not very well documented. And there are just a lot of stories and a lot of things that happened when, people had VHS cameras, but they didn't have their phone,
Yeah.
So, only so many things got recorded. Only so many people did interviews. Only, when I was recording the Screaming Trees on an Atari MX5050B, Jack and Dino was recording Nirvana and Soundgarden on an Atari MX5050B. Dinosaur Jr. back in Boston was being recorded on an Atari MX5050B. Down in LA, Whisker Du were being recorded on an MX5050B. So everyone was using the same half-inch 8-track. Certain things were like, okay, that's a 1985 sound. That's a 1984 sound, and you can hear it. It's all over the records. Mm-hmm. People don't really understand that. People are excited about tape. People want to know about all of this, but it's an odd one. So anyway, thank you for your efforts in looking into the past and some of the early days and all of this.
No problem. I appreciate that. I really like the old stories of how things got to where they were. Like I love history. So I feel like with Nirvana, because they're such a big band, and like people just look at them, they look at them just as stars, but they don't look at the early part of how they got there. So I love uncovering these little stories about what things actually were like. What was the initial impression of them in terms of their professionalism or how they approached recording?
Very serious. They understood that this was an opportunity. No attitude, nothing. They just said, how do we do this? Where do we set up?
So in terms of the recording, I've read, correct me if I'm mistaken, that there were some technical issues working with Nirvana in the studio. Is this correct?
Well, all of the blues style stage destruction they would do at the end of the set. The guitar and the guitar amp were fine, but the drums were pretty messed up, and the bass was as well, and the bass amplifier. So I think one pickup was working on the bass, one speaker was working on the amp. Do you know about Chad's drum kit?
Yeah, it was like way too big for him, right?
Well, that being said, but it was made out of fiberglass. It was a very specific kind of drum set that was made popular by Billy Cobham and various jazz fusion drummers, and it was made of plexiglass. And, so no wood, no nothing, just black plexiglass. So it had a sound kind of like 5-gallon plastic buckets or something like that. It's worth noting that Chris's bass and Chad's drum set are like 80s garbage, instruments that no one cared about anymore, and that's how they got to Aberdeen. Although, actually, I think the drum set might have been from Yakima. You might have got that in Yakima. But even that big drum set, that was a North Drum Kit Junior. So the actual North Kit is bigger. Yeah.
So considering they had, at the time, I guess, subpar equipment, how did you approach recording the gear? Did you have to do anything unique that you wouldn't typically do?
Well, actually, I love the way the North Drum Kit sounded. That's the drum kit on Bleach. And in particular, I love the tom-toms because it's just one thing that's a little bigger, so there's no character variation. It's exactly the same sound, just a little lower and a little lower and a little lower. So I didn't do anything special with that, except that Dino told me that he mic'd them from the inside which is a unique thing you can do with drums like that, because that way you don't get any hi-hat or cymbals or any bleed, but because it was made of plexiglass. And also, you've seen pictures of them. I mean, it looks like a ship's, exhaust pipe. I mean, they bent forward, right? Maybe you haven't seen that. The tom-tom's a very unusual construction. And you can get right up inside, and apparently they sound the same from the inside as they do from on top.
Really?
So I jammed the microphones up inside, and then he never hit them. Which over 5 songs, he barely hit them, and it pissed me off, because that was my favorite thing about that drum kit.
So you mentioned that the guitar amp you guys used was okay. Do you remember which type of amp it was?
I think it was the same amp that Gary Lee Conner was playing through at the time, which was a small solid-state PV with a 12-inch speaker. And just a shitty way to make a good sound, But but it sounded fine. But yeah, traditionally people would use tube amplifiers and, Fender twin reverbs or Marshalls or things like that. So using a solid state PV is pretty grotesque. There's only so many ways to record somebody at the music source. We'd have some isolation rooms, and I set up, Kurt in one room and Krist in another room. And then I explain we keep the doors halfway open so everything bleeds in and you get a little bit of sound that way.
In terms of your relationship with the band, how did you guys first meet?
Because of all of my friends in Olympia and all of their friends in Olympia, we had lots of mutual friends. And they did play a show in Ellensburg. They were friends with the Screaming Trees, so that's how they ended up in Ellensburg, playing. I didn't meet Nirvana then, but we kind of said hi to Krist. And yeah, I don't think I talked to them until I recorded them.
So you recorded 5 songs. 2 of them, Stain and Been a Sun, got on to the Blue EP. And then the other songs, Token Easter Song, Polly, and Even in His Youth, they were released later on. Do you know why those 3 songs were shelved for a little bit?
They were never finished. The other 2 were finished. The other 2 were mixed. Where the other 3 were just, things that we never got around to. I think we were going to finish them, but that never happened. And so later on, Jack mixed those tracks. I think the big thing you can hear is on Been a Sun and Stain, there's one guitar overdubbed to make the guitar a little bigger, and the vocals were overdubbed. Where the other 3 songs you mentioned, those are all live scratch vocals. I mean, Kurt's scratch vocals were very good, and I recorded them very well, but I wasn't intending on using them as the finished vocals.
Does it ever bother you, the constant association with that band? Is it something is there anything negative about that for you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the negative totally outweighs the positive.
Really, eh?
Yeah, and it would take me a long time to really enumerate how, but it'd be, the kind of people that come to me and the kind of people that I work with, and I'm really happy with how 99% of it goes, but there are ways that the Nirvana thing has fucked shit up, I think to a certain extent I probably wouldn't have had a 90s career as a record producer if it wasn't for Nirvana and Soundgarden and Screaming Trees. That would saw, well, mainstream media is busy sucking in the bands. Are also saying, oh, what producer did this? What producer did that? And all of that. So, if the underground hadn't been so profitable, I probably wouldn't have had my little major label run with what was left of the music business in the 90s and all of that. So, and even that wasn't necessarily even 50% good. There's a lot of things about that sucked, but that's on me. That's on Nirvana's fault. I'm really happy with my life. I'm very, things worked out really, really well, but the Nirvana thing, it's very complicated. I'm sorry, and that's all. It's very complicated. It's hard, and it is really hard to even shorthand it. But it isn't as grim as I'm making it look in this particular moment. Sorry.
No worries at all, man. So I guess then on the other side of things, what's the positive from your association with Nirvana?
Well, what bell do you have to ring to impress your father? Daddy did this, Daddy did this, Daddy did that. I think my dad, who passed away 2015, I think he was very happy to have, go to the Tower Records and people go like, Gordon Fisk, wow, do you know Steve Fisk? And you, well, as a matter of fact. So yeah, my dad was proud of me, and that's a very great thing, and I don't take that for granted. And Nirvana, you know, not so much some of these other wonderful bands, but Nirvana, you know, that was the Oli scene, you know. So the same people that love Nirvana love Beat Happening and all the other stuff that went through there. So I got to record really wonderful bands that appreciated that aspect of my connections and the music I'd done. And before the Nirvana story was out there, you know, I think the music I did with them stands up pretty well. Mm-hmm. And that's because of them and the songwriting and what they've done. So when the story was done, I was happy to be the guy that did that work, you know. And yeah, it's funny to have the reissues happen and all of that, you know. That's been very, very cool, you know, and I've made some money. Very, very, you know, but just hardcore thing, yeah. And Nirvana made sure everyone got paid when With the Lights Out record came out. The producers and engineers that worked on that made money. It was their turn up the bat, you know.
Yeah, I hear you. So
that's a sports analogy. There were no sports analogies at all. I don't do sports analogies, and they didn't either.
That's funny because in the MLS in soccer, Toronto lost to Seattle in the finals last year. So I texted Jack and Dino about that, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I heard that when you guys finished Been a Son, you played it on the speakers, you guys were dancing or something? Like what happened there exactly?
There are tables in the back of the studio where the advertising people sit and, you know, conduct their other business with their laptops and have little gidgy lunches and things like that. And there's an old story about when Humble Pie's record was done, they danced on the console and actually really fucked up the console. And I won't try to tell you that story. That's in the internet. But Nirvana said, well, if we can't dance on the console, can we dance on the schmincy tables that the ad people eat lunch off of? And I said, sure. And so we all jumped up on tables and danced around and played the track a couple of times, you know. I've been a son maybe 3-4 times, really high volume, and act like we won. We awesome. Recorded a song and mixed it. Yay! You know?
So, do you remember anything in particular when it came to recording that song, "Been a Son"? Like, was there anything that sticks out in terms of how you recorded that song?
No, I mean they hadn't got a chance to dink around, you know, with that kind of gear, and so I think a few other interviews I mentioned playing with this giant digital reverb that, you know, you could make things sound preposterous with it. So we experimented with it, making it sound preposterous for a little while before we, and then also it was a trick because of the bass solo, because the whole song gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's a bass solo. So it's the last chorus. It's always sounds a little shitty because it's a step down from the bass solo, which is very, very frenetic and kind of eats up the whole audio spectrum. So that was a bit of a drag trying to, you know, get all of that to work. I still think I didn't do a very good job of that, but that's what we have.
Yeah, I think it sounds great, man. So what was it like recording Krist Novoselic's bass playing? How was he working within the studio?
Just totally cool. You know, I think the bass solo was an overdub, though we put it alongside the one minute track, so it just was really thick and exactly the same way as he played it twice. No, and what was wrong with his trip? The bass was a little fucked up and the amp was a little fucked up. There was one good speaker and one good pickup, and so, you know, it sounded good. But the unfortunate thing was he really was trying to get his shit fixed for the session and had been running around for a couple of days, you know, because he knew we had to get into the studio and was very nervous about that. So he meant to have it together. He worked hard to have it together, but it just, you know, there's only so much you can do.
I hear you. You were saying that the reason that their gear was damaged is because at the end of their shows, they would often smash their equipment, right?
Right.
So just because this is something about Nirvana I've always found fascinating. If it's going to severely impact their ability to record, why did they keep smashing their gear anyways? Like, do you know why they kept doing that?
No.
It's kind of funny. So, was there anything funny about the sessions, like when you were recording them? Like, are there any funny memories you have from that time with them?
Well, this is not really funny, but there was a toilet in the middle of the studio, so if you had to relieve yourself, you didn't have to leave the building. You could jump into a little improvised toilet.
Okay.
And it had bad wallpaper with birds and musical notes on a staff. And Chad came out of the bathroom going, "Has anybody ever played those notes? What does it actually sound like when you? What's the wallpaper?" And he says, "There's a whistle while you poop," or he was anyway. That was a bad Chad joke from the session.
How was Chad as a drummer in general? Did you enjoy working with him?
Oh yeah, he's a great drummer and doesn't get his due. Mm-hmm. He's got a looser kind of, I guess, a hippie feel or something like that. But, I think, he sounded great in Nirvana. I think that version of In Bloom that he did was really, really good. Mm-hmm. Maybe as good as their version with Dave, if you want to just talk about opinions or something like that. But no, I think Chad's an amazing drummer. He's a really good guitar player. He's a songwriter.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I agree. I feel like Chad really doesn't get the due. I feel like he should have been in the Hall of Fame, quite frankly, in my opinion. But that's just, that's a separate topic altogether, I suppose.
Yeah, when things get that big, there's all kinds of, shoulda, this or that. Everybody means well.
So what was the chemistry like between the three guys in the studio? What was it like to actually work with them, essentially?
It was fun. And they had a great three-way sense of humor. For a band being where they were from and what they were doing and the money that was being spent on them and their previous recording sessions and all of that, getting to record in a 24-track was a big deal. That was the first time they'd been in a proper 24-track, which was the industry standard, full fidelity, wide tape, mixing console, all that stuff. I mean, they did a great record with Jack. I think they did a better record with Jack than they did with me, but they were nervous. It was Kurt's band, but he wasn't an asshole, but he was directing things a little bit. I think some of the recordings of Polly's, have Chad starting the song a few different times because it wasn't exactly catching. I mentioned that in an interview once, but it wasn't a problem. It just was them trying to, work out an arrangement. And when it was over with, everyone was really happy. so that it was a very quick session. We had 2 evenings to do 5 songs, and we got, 5 songs recorded and 2 finished. They talked a little bit about, having an advance from Sub Pop and, what the second record was. I mean, this sounds silly, but they said, "Oh, great. So we'll do the second record with you right here. This will be great. We've got an advance." And obviously the second record was Nevermind, and it happened a long way away after a lot of other shit happened. But as far as a sense of humor, I mean, they just had a good time. They didn't do, send up some other people's songs or anything like that. But it was funny. And also, the fact that they were there and they were like this new baby band on Sub Pop, and all of a sudden they're in a big studio up on Capitol Hill. That was funny. That was already ironic and weird enough that you didn't have to say much more than that without them understanding kind of the weirdness of the situation and all of that. So it was a good time. We had fun. It was, I at the risk of stepping into my own persona or narcissism or whatever, but both Kurt and Krist were big fans of Beat Happening, and so getting to work with me was I think a big deal for them at the time. So I often don't really take that into account, but I think they wanted to make a good recording because they're friends of Screaming Trees and their friends Beat Happening and a lot of other their friends that made really good recordings with me.
I read that when you recorded Polly, Kurt was finger picking. Is this correct?
I think it's a strum. I mean, I'm just hearing it in my head, but no, I mean, it's the live guitar, and especially that was that whole deal that they were trying to find the pocket, with the cymbal ride, some 8-note pulse. Yeah, I'm almost sure it was just a back and forth kind of folk strum or something like that.
Of those 5 songs you recorded, was there any one that gave you more of a hard time, or was it all more or less kind of the same vibe recording all 5 of them?
Polly was the one that he struggled with just because it had nuance and was soft. But no, they had everything did seriously in 1 or 2 takes. It was pretty straightforward. And I don't think any of the takes ever broke down. I just played it all the way through a few times, and that if anything was the producer thing that I got to do. I got to say, I think that's the take, that's it, and then they would listen to the playback and go, yeah, okay, that's the take, and then just do the next one. It was very simple.
The version on Nevermind is completely different. When you first heard that, basically the acoustic version on Nevermind, what was your reaction to that?
This sounds like a smart-ass answer, but I thought, wow, that totally works as an acoustic song. And I thought it suited the story of the song better. Whatever you might like about the version of Polly that I recorded, I didn't do anything more than record it. So I put the sounds together, put the mics up, but that's Jack's mix. That's not my mix. And it really wasn't produced at all. It's just Nirvana in a room. And that might be why you like it. Possibly, those 3 tracks that didn't get finished, quote unquote, is Nirvana as a 3-piece in a room in a recording studio, and you didn't hear much of that after that, right? And there are demos and great live recordings, but you didn't hear Nirvana in a studio where it didn't get produced after the original, take was done.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy like the rougher side of Nirvana. Like I think like that, like I actually do like the production on Nevermind. Some people don't like it because it's too produced, but I think it's great. But I like that
record. I like Nevermind. I don't listen to it, but it's really well done.
Yeah, and I like that there is that rougher side to them. They kind of went back to it with In Utero a little bit, but really it's the pre-Nevermind stuff that if you want to catch them raw, that's the stuff you listen to. In my view, at least.
I think people respond. They recognize the humanity in an undoctored, recording. I think that's where that's when all of a sudden you've got a link with 100 years of music. Whatever we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years now it's a craft based thing. It's not about capturing live events, and that's fine. That is what that is too. Steve Albini talks eloquently to this time thing where there were more people in the studio than microphones. So eventually as we went forward, there were more people in the control room than there were in the studio because we were recording everything one at a time and layering up and making the 70s happen. But 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it's an awful lot of 3 mics in the room and it all goes down to mono or it all goes down to stereo or something like that. So I think people innately respond to that. They can hear that it's a bunch of people in a room or 3 people in a room or 5 people in a room.
All the guys I've spoken to from the Pacific Northwest, they actually said that they kind of liked that Seattle was a little bit excluded because it gave you guys the space to just be yourselves. That old vibe of like, Seattle for Seattle, is that ever going to come back, do you think, or is that kind of over?
I think the internet destroyed regionalism and regionalism exists in a new way, but no, that'll never be back. And also Seattle isn't Seattle anymore. I'm in Tacoma. A lot of musicians from the 90s are in Tacoma. A lot of musicians from the 90s have left or live in Portland or live in Everett or something. So Seattle isn't really like a place where you can, sit down in your cheap apartment and write songs and hang out with your friends that have a cheap apartment and, go to a cheap studio. I mean, that's all over with, along with the music industry and live music and everything else. But no, I don't think Seattle's ever going to return to that moment of, community and innocence and all of that. But that's okay. That was then, I watched this thing explode from the beginning and saw Seattle, transform into this, weird version of itself with all these actors and media people. And, it became kind of a less than pleasant place to live. And the thing that, just to be positive for a second, like the original bands that were influenced by Nirvana, and I don't want to name names, but we can point at the people. Mm-hmm. They were trying to get signed, or they got signed, or they ran about ideas and started ripping off Nirvana. And Nirvana were so important that they just kept influencing musician after musician after musician after musician. And now when I record people that are influenced by Nirvana, they're good people that like Nirvana. You know, they're not trying to be famous. They're not trying to get their heroin thing going, or, you know, whatever the stupid shit that was going on back in the 90s. So yeah, it's at least evolved to the point now where people look at it as music, you know.
Mm-hmm. When it first blew up, like in 91, like, what was that experience like for you? Like, see, like, I know these guys, and then poof.
That's one of those questions that's so hard to answer, but I'll try to answer it for you, because my studio and my living situation was downtown next to a hipster cafe that if you were from out of town, that would be the restaurant you would go to. So you'd go in there for coffee in the morning and you go, oh, Sonic Youth must be playing in town tonight, or mm-hmm. Oh, Michael Stipe is still here, or, you know, just, you know, it was like a dipstick of, you know, the town getting hipper and hipper, and eventually it turned into actors hanging out there and TV commercials being shot there. It was weird. There were lots of local people that had been musicians for a long time, and they somehow thought that had something to do with Seattle, so it had something to do with them, and they found out the hard way that no one cared about their music. There was a whole set of people that moved into Seattle, and especially in Belltown where I was living, you know, there was just lots of rental spaces. And so, yeah, it got really, really weird. I have this friend of mine who built hot rods and road racers and boxcar derby shit, and he had a Vespa that was covered with chicken feathers. It was like a novel thing he had, and he had it parked in front of the restaurant, and Demi Moore backed into it. Oh. You know, their rental car. So that's you know, that's sort of like a moment, you know, when you realize how fucked up it is.
Yeah.
Demi Moore backs over your friend's car or your friend's Vespa or whatever.
What was your relationship with Soundgarden like?
I produced them once.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for the stuff that got tacked onto the back of the Screaming Life EP, which was the FOP EP. So I recorded the FOP EP, which had the FOP remix, and then there's the FOP remix, the Big Dumb Sex remix, the Spoon Man remix. I did a rejected remix for Switch Open that no one's ever heard. There are two remixes of Spoon Man, one that got rejected and the one that got released, which was the B-side of Black Hole Sun, which is actually pretty cool. And then the work I did with the Telephantasm. So a lot of remix work. And specifically, they wanted me to do my kind of remixing, which is using a lot of media sources and just deconstructing the band, you know, in kind of a brutal way, you know, things reconfigured and basses over, you know, verses over choruses and choruses over verses and things like that. So the Soundgarden remixes weren't really remixes the way Madonna had remixes. They were, you know, they weren't, you aren't supposed to dance to them. Yeah. I think that was the idea. That's why the labels paid for it. Oh yeah, it's summertime, let's get a Soundgarden remix. And then they get Big Dumb Sex, which I think he says fuck like 45 times.
Do you think Kim and the band would be able to eventually kind of get back in the studio and make a new album, or is that something that's not going to be possible?
Well, if you're inviting me to speculate, I haven't spent any time thinking about that. I will say I'm very happy that Kim is playing again and that he's taking this opportunity to work in different musical situations. And if Kim stopped playing, a lot of people would be really bummed out. You know, I mean, that's inside that thing he does. That's a big part of what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, if there's never another Soundgarden, that's a drag, you know?
So how did your relationship with Soundgarden begin? Was it similar to how your relationship with Nirvana began?
almost exactly the same. Well, actually, not quite the same way. Not quite the same way. I was living in Ellensburg, and I got invited to make an EP for them. But it was the same thing where they had a very wonderful record they did with Jack, and now I was getting to do the second record, which is a little like having a gun pointed at you, you know, because Jack's so good and people make great records with Jack. But yeah, I think it was 1989, and I was still living in Eastern Washington. So without ever meeting Soundgarden, you know, we had you understand that record was recorded in the Moore Theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a friend of mine was also a very good engineer and producer, Drew Canulet, took his truck up and got it. Actually, I think he negotiated the space. I think he knew the guys at the Moore. And so we set up in the alley, and the 2 days, I think we had 2 days of recording in the Moore Theater, and that's how that's where I got to know Soundgarden. And I'm still good friends with Kim. You know, we talk a lot. Yeah, no, Kim turned into a lifelong friend. He's a pretty amazing person. And they were a different band with Hero, you know. All respects to the other great bass players that were in the band, but that was that was a Hero record. He definitely had this kind of like Chad. He brought kind of a looseness to it and a swing to it that kind of disappeared with other players and all that.